You ready?
Yep.
Hi, welcome to the judges webinar for the Pigman region as well as the River City Regional TSA conferences. If you're judging at the Pigman region, that's going to be hosted by Hazard Community and Technical College, and that conference date is March 18th. If you're joining us at the River City region, that is hosted by the University of Louisville, and that is going to be on March 2nd. So you can see that on your screen here. The primary purpose of today's recording is to help you understand how to judge a TSA event and what to expect, as well as some of the logistics on the student side and their guidelines as well. So we're going to start off, first of all, we just expect judges to be in business casual attire. Please bring a cell phone so you have access to a stopwatch in case your event is a timed event, and as well as a calculator, just so you have that to tabulate your scores when you're judging on the rubric. Students will also be in business casual attire, so they should be in at least a polo shirt and a pair of khakis, possibly a blouse and maybe a skirt or a pair of slacks. So that's just a requirement. We want students to understand what it's like to be in the business world and the expectation of attire when it comes to that. When you first arrive at your event, there will be a registration desk set up, and we'll email you and tell you where that's going to be located at your specific event. So when you show up, please stop by the registration desk and you'll pick up your event packet, and that will help you understand all the ins and outs of the event that you're judging. You should have already received a link to the agenda that has you assigned to that specific event. So please show up 15 minutes early to your event. And if you're judging with more than one person, we ask that your scores are within 10 points of each other. A lot of schools and a lot of students are using this regional competition as preparation for state and national conference. And if they get a score of 30 from one judge and 90 from another, it's hard for them to know, I need to improve here, or I did really well here. So if you're working with a co-judge, please make sure that your scores are within 10 points of each other. That way students can really see where they need to improve and use your constructive criticism and your constructive feedback accordingly. Additionally, make sure when you're judging on the rubric itself, please leave a couple notes or a couple comments of some things that the student or team did well as some things that they can improve upon, because we do give those rubrics back to the schools. They can give those to the students, and that helps them prepare and improve for the state and national conference. I'm going to turn it over to Andy, and he's going to kind of help you understand how to read an event guide. So we're going to use engineering by design as an example. So Andy's just going to kind of walk you through what an event guide looks like, the basic structure, and then we'll talk about a rubric so you understand how to utilize that. And I'm sure Andy will mention this as well, but these event guides, most of them are created for the national conference. So there are things in this event guide that we will not do at our regional events, and we'll cover that as we get to it. So Andy?
All right. The front page of each one has an overview of the event. It has an eligibility. In other words, is it an individual event, a team event? Is the team event limited? If it isn't, it can have anywhere from 2 to 6 members. It'll tell how long the length of the event is, and that's one of those things that we may adjust. I think Mark will show you a chart here in a little bit that has those adjustments on it. It'll discuss the attire, and then it goes on to talk about the procedure for the preliminary and semifinal rounds. Now, for regions, we will pretty much only be doing either pre-conference or the preliminary rounds of the events, and that's because these rule guides are written for a 4-day conference where we are holding a 1-day regional. Mark, if you want to scroll on down a little bit. Then after that, it starts talking about the requirements. So for the preliminary round, it will specifically list what is required of the student to turn in. Much of what we will be seeing is the documentation portion of the event and possibly some type of artifact. So the documentation is a portfolio. Some may be introduced in advance of conference, and they'll be digital. There'll be PDFs. If not, if they're turned in at the conference, they will be in a clear front portfolio cover. And they're required to have a table of contents, a cover page with certain information, and all that is covered in that requirement section of this PDF that you're seeing here on the screen. If it has a display, it has an artifact, it has the rules and guides for that as well. Then those are judged. And for region, that would be the end of it. We will determine our top 3 just from that. So it goes on from there. And if you want to, and it talks about the 21st century skills, STEM integration, so forth, that each event covers. Then you scroll to go to the next page, and it begins a rubric. And the big thing, as Mark mentioned earlier, looking at the top right corner facing the page there is what's called a go, no-go specification. We don't want you to spend inordinate amounts of time judging something when the students obviously did not include all the required work. So there's not any way possible that they're gonna come in the top 3 anyway. So this puts the onus on the students to be concise and be complete. And you'll notice that in this particular event, there are 4 check boxes. The top 3 must be checked. In other words, before you start judging, check that the documentation portfolio is present, check that the display was turned in, and check that the prototype is present. So in the preliminary round for this particular event, engineering design, they will have a portfolio, they will have a 3-fold science board or something similar that's a display. They will display a lot of their information, and then they will have a prototype of the device that they designed. So if any of one of those 3 things is not present, which they will each 3 be scored in the rubric, then you choose the last box, which is entry is not evaluated, or for all intents and purposes, it is disqualified. We just choose not to use the term disqualified too much. So then you scroll down and you have the first part of the rubric, which is the display. You're gonna, each part has its own section. You'll notice in the far left column, for instance, the display has aesthetics, it has the prototype model, and it has the overall impact. What you'll see under each one of those is either a ×1, ×2, ×3, and there's even a couple of events that have a ×4. So that means whatever score you choose between 0 and 10 that you're going to put in the far right column, if it's ×1 and you give it 8 points, you will score 8 points in that column. If it's ×2 and you're going to give it 7 points, then you put 14 points in that column, et cetera, and so on through. But that's something to make sure that you watch for, because it's very easy. I've done it, Mark's done it. We've all missed that at times and had to scratch out and re-over. The next part is scoring the documentation. You can see it's kind of small, but information gathering. Part of this engineering design is research. So they're going to provide research. How complete is their research on the topic they picked? So you're going to score between 0 and 10 again. Possible solutions. We all know part of the engineering design process is coming up with potential solutions. So how many solutions did they come up with before they decided on one? What process did they use for selecting that one solution? They're supposed to explain that to you in their documentation. Evaluation and testing. Did they discuss and talk about, maybe even show some graphics or charts on testing they did on their prototypes or potential prototypes before they even selected one? The more complete their documentation, the better their score should be. Did they go through a refinement stage? You will find some that will do a good job on this, and you may find some that totally leave that part out. That's not a disqualification, and it's not a rules violation. It's just, if any one of these sections is not in their documentation, it's just a 0 in that far left column. How well did they communicate their solution? And there's a form that they're supposed to use. Some of them may create their own, look similar to a spread chart, called a plan of work. That is where they document the times that they work as a team or individuals. They list who worked, they list what their division of labor was, who did what, and you need to make sure that also at the bottom of that, that their advisor signed off on that to verify that they did work those days. I have found in judging events that sometimes the plan of work log becomes the great definer between, you may have some great projects, you may have some great documentation, but some students just don't understand that logging their work, specifying division of labor, it really helps plan out projects, and that's a very important thing. And sometimes that can be the great delineator when you have close scores. So that is a object to look for and pay specific attention to. And of course, references, they should be documented in MLA format, and looking for references that actually pertain to what they did. And if they reference those documents and those places that they got their research within their portfolio, that's also a reason to give them a higher score. Mark, if you want to scroll on down. Of course, each one of these sections, and you total them up, and then there'll be a place at the bottom here, preliminary total score. Because then the presentation is for semifinalists. We will not be doing that part at region. So you would score the two sections at the top, and that would become their total score for the regional contest. There would be no score for the semifinal total.
Yeah, if you do have a rules violation, so if students didn't do something they were supposed to do, that you can see each section, it's just 20% off that section. And then another thing, I mentioned comments before, so please leave a couple comments, good things and bad things that students, what they excelled at, what they need to improve on, so when they move on. Once you judge that event, then you just sign and print your name and sign at the bottom, so we know that that event has been completely judged.
For instance, in this event, probably, and most events, the only two rules violations that you're probably going to have are dress code violations. If a student comes in wearing tennis shoes and blue jeans, that's a violation. You can only have one. If you have more than one violation, you can only deduct the points one time. So there's only a 20% deduction once. If they have three violations, you still only deduct 20%. The other would be if they turned in their documentation and it was required in a clear front report cover and they put it in a 3-ring binder, or they just turned it in a manila envelope, or we even had students just turn in paper stapled together and sometimes not even stapled together. That would be a rules violation. So those are examples that you might see, probably about the only, or of course, this is a static event. They're going to turn it in, you're going to judge it, so they're not going to be present. In active events, for instance, like computer drafting, CAD, or problem solving or something, if they're supposed to have their cell phones turned off and put away, if they're using their cell phones, that could be a rules violation.
Yeah, another thing I'll note, Andy talked about, at regional, we abbreviate a lot of these competitions simply based on time. So we will print these rubrics that will automatically have their participant ID on it. That's the number that each student has designated to them. And then if it's a team event, there will be a team number on there. So that's what you'll use when they come in. It'll be on their name tag. So you'll have their participant ID that they'll have on them. And we will cross off. So if, for example, this event, if they're not doing a presentation, this whole area will be crossed off. So you know not to judge that. So we want to make sure that there's no confusion. Same thing goes if you're judging an event, for example, and the go, no go, like for engineering design, this is going to be an online submission. So they're actually submitting a PDF. So this will be crossed off. They won't have to do the 2 flash drives. So when we hand you those rubrics the day of, when you walk in and get your judges packet, it will be very explicit which sections you're going to be judging. In addition to that, some of these events will be pre-judged by somebody other than yourself, because students are actually submitting early some things, and we're going to judge that and have that done so it saves time the day of. So you may receive a rubric and half of it's already filled out, and then you're responsible for filling out another section of it. and then you'll total the scores all together, and then you'll bring all of your rubrics back to the registration desk, and then we'll tabulate all those scores and figure out our top 3 for each event, and those students will come to the awards ceremony later that day. One other thing, and I'd like Andy to kind of talk about this, but when you're judging some events, you may judge 1 or 2 and then decide, man, this second one was so much better than the first. So Andy, you want to kind of hit on, that it's okay to go back to the rubrics and modify scores as you see more and more entries?
It's most helpful, first off, to use pencils rather than pen, or at least pencil until you've completed them all. And then you may, for integrity or to make sure nothing gets changed, make it in ink later. The other is sometimes, especially if you have more than 2 or 3, sometimes some events you'll only have 2 or 3 entries, some you'll have 15 or 16. So I've always found and told my judges in events to maybe just skim over them first and kind of get an idea of where the documentation and so forth lies. Because sometimes it's a habit, you'll see the first one, especially if you've never done the event, wow, this is great. And you'll give it some pretty high scores, and then you get 2 or 3 later and man, this one blew the first one out of the water. Where am I going to go with my scores? So that way, if you're in pencil, you can adjust the scores and look at the 2 and say, oh, well, yeah, this one probably wasn't as good as that one, so I probably ought to drop this score here and raise the score up. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that, and I can't tell you how many times I've instructed judges to do that. And we actually have a training workshop at the national conference to teach our judges to do that. So it kind of helps to kind of look over the entries before you start, kind of get an idea of where they're at, and then delve into them and look closer. But there's no problem with adjusting scores when you figure out one actually was better than the other one that you graded higher.
Yep, that's exactly right. So in your judges packet, when you show up the morning of or the afternoon, depending on when your event is and when you stop by, you're going to have a sign-in sheet, so you'll have all the teams or individuals sign in. If they don't show up, then we just simply mark them as a no-show. Sometimes students, are sick and they can't make the event, or sometimes they didn't prepare enough, so they just didn't bother showing up. So you will see some of that. In that packet, we'll also include the event guide, just so you have a copy of it to refer to as you're judging. You'll receive a rubric for every team or every individual for your competition. You'll also have a copy of the prompt. So some of these events have a theme for the year, and it changes every year, so students can't just submit the same thing year after year. Or they may have a prompt that goes along with it, so you may have that in your packet. And I think that's about it. We'll include a pin in there just so you don't have to, in case you forget that. So really on your side, just business casual attire for the day, have a cell phone or at least a stopwatch and a calculator so you can tabulate your scores fairly quickly. Andy, is there anything else you can think of that they need to know before this event or the event that they're attending?
Come prepared to have fun and be amazed.
Yeah, and a lot of you that are judging, you're kind of a content expert in the area that you're judging. We tried to align you, or at least a STEM professional. So help the students understand why you're there. Make them understand, if you work for the college or university that's hosting, this is a great time to recruit. You can talk about, hey, I'm a professor in computer science. This is why you should come to the University of Louisville, or we have this great drones program at Hazard. If you're interested to learn more, use this as a recruiting tool, as well as just helping students understand why you have interest in this specific field. It's important for students to be exposed to all these careers, and who better to hear that from than you as a professional in your area. Other than that, we can't thank you enough for joining. If you have any questions, you'll have my email address as well as Andy's in the email communication that you'll receive over the next couple of days and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. And we look forward to seeing you either at Hazard Community Technical College on March 18th or the University of Louisville on March 2nd.
I have one other comment. I did think of something. Something what Mark did cover, but he didn't cover in depth, the themes and problems or prompts that the students are given. You might find a little generic or quite open-ended. That tends to be a TSA process to dig out the students' creativity, to give them an open potential for their solution to see where they can actually go with it. So don't be too closed-minded, or don't be say, wow, this is pretty general, pretty open, but that is a deliberate part of the competition to draw out the students' creativity. And that's what I meant by come prepared to have fun and be amazed, because some of their creativity will amaze you. Some of it you might not, but the cream typically rises to the top. You will see some amazing things. Sorry.
Yep. No, you're good. Thanks, Andy. And we look forward to meeting you in person at one of the 2 regional conferences. Thank you.